Welcome to Courageous Conversations with Canopy Atlanta. Canopy Atlanta is a community journalism nonprofit founded in 2020. We choose, report, and share stories with Atlantans, redefining who journalism is, by, and for. Our mission is to equip Metro Atlanta residents to tell stories about the issues their communities care about.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nzingha Hall. I am a local to Atlanta, Georgia, a transplant from St. Louis, Missouri. I am a journalist, consultant, and doula. Today's conversation, we will be talking about issues related to reproductive health rights and justice. We're going to be talking about Roe v. Wade. We're going to be talking about bodily autonomy. I'll let the panel introduce themselves and we can get into our topic today.
My name is Osei Kweku. I am a first generation here in the United States. My parents are from Ghana, and I am in multimedia.
My name is Paul Glaze. I am originally from around Augusta and in Jefferson County, Georgia, and am currently based in Athens, and I work at New Georgia Project.
King Williams. I am a journalist and a documentary filmmaker from Atlanta, Georgia, and just someone who always is covering the history of Atlanta.
It's a pleasure to be here amongst you. Let's get right into it. And this question can be for anyone. We're just going to do this popcorn style. Can anyone give a summary related to the landscape of what is going on with Roe versus Wade, specifically in Georgia and specifically in Atlanta?
With the recent Dobbs decision that came down, there's been a lot of talk about that, and there's even been, I think, some confusion around one aspect of it. So after the Dobbs decision and when you hear the Supreme Court decision that came out and you hear people talking about that, my understanding is what we're talking about is basically a states' rights argument on the subject of reproductive justice. And in Georgia, we already have precious few providers of reproductive health care. In fact, I think it's about half of Georgia counties don't have an OBGYN in them. And the big weight right now is a couple of years back, we passed something that you hear people refer to. It's like a 6-week ban, and we're waiting on a judge to make a determination of whether that's going to immediately go into effect or not. But my understanding is that right now, abortion services are still legal in Georgia, that there are providers around Planned Parenthood, Feminist Women's Health Center, and groups like that. I don't know. King, do you have other things that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think on the state level, the immediate switch, even by the time this episode comes out, is there's going to be effectively the 11th Circuit Court, which is a national court, is going to give a decision on whether or not Georgia should even be able to have this abortion ban. So we'll know by the time this comes out within the next few days what that's going to be. The real thing that's more interesting now is that state level Republicans are already positioning for the 2023 legislative session this thing called fetal personhood. And so this is when a heartbeat is detected within the womb of a mother. And so right now, that creates a different set of laws around both abortion, reproductive health. And so as we're really getting focused on what this 6-week ban means, this whole personhood ban opens up the world of a lot of things we just have not seen yet in the state of Georgia. And I think we should be very concerned. Everything from child support to wills and testaments of people and things like that are about to come online really fast by the time January 1 comes around in 2023.
Thank you, King. And just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, Roe versus Wade is the landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in which the court ruled that the Constitution of the United States conferred the right to have an abortion. And the decision struck down many federal and state abortion laws and fueled an ongoing abortion debate in the United States about whether or to what extent abortion should be legal or who should decide the legality of abortion, what the role of moral and religious views in the political sphere should be. And the decision also shaped the debate concerning which methods the Supreme Court should use in a constitutional adjudication. And as we know now that the colloquial sort of language that's used being now is that the Supreme Court has essentially given the states the right to determine whether folks can have the right to abortion or not.
Is it true? There's a man on our board who I admire very much, Reverend Francis Johnson, who was talking about Roe v. Wade, also helping establish a lot of what we think of as like the right to privacy.
Yes.
And is that also someone that's,
I think that's definitely something that is going to be debated as well. I know that there are some states that are making the argument that that this overturn of Roe is in violation of the rights to privacy. So I've heard some conversations related to that in some states. Yes.
And to that point, I'm sorry, Osei.
No, I'd be interested to hear from your perspective as a woman, just more about that. I mean, obviously, I know what Roe versus Wade is, but as males sitting here, that's one thing. But as a woman being present in the midst of us, how would you educate us on what this means and how it reverberates through, the community of women? Sure. And I've heard some things, and I'll also, mention this. I've heard some things as it relates to it's becoming less of a women's rights issue and the whole term of birthing people. So I want to understand more about that too.
Well, the only thing, I can't speak on behalf of all women, but as a doula and as someone who has been working in abortion care for about 5 years now, I think about the decisions that will allow me to live the best life that I can live. The productivity, the ease. When I think about the realities and all the things I want to accomplish, that to me means that my reproductive future is in my hands, and I can make the decisions on behalf of myself, and I can create the families that I do want to create or do not want to create. And that's important that I make that decision and define that for myself. And that isn't not in the hands of the state. And I think it's very dangerous when our destinies are in the hands of the state. So I'm not only coming into this space as an abortion doula, I'm coming into this space as an anti-capitalist and an abolitionist. Yes, birthing folks, meaning that not just women can give birth, non-binary folks, gender non-conforming folks. Gender is a spectrum, right? So I do identify as a woman, a cisgender woman, but folks who have abortions, not all define themselves as women, and that's wonderful. That's great. They deserve the care, the most responsible, culturally competent care. And I love the conversation of birthing folks with uteri. I think it should be more expansive because when you're going into clinics and you don't see yourself being reflected in the care that you are trying to receive, that to me is not culturally competent care. And I, as a doula, want to ensure that that the folks that I'm serving, I'm identifying them as their correct pronouns. I'm ensuring that it's a space that they feel comfortable, all of those things. And I think that's really important. And I love the conversation of changing language. Language should always change. I think that's great.
Okay. I just needed, I wanted to be educated a little bit. I feel like I saw the exchange between the senator from Missouri and the law professor. And I thought that was an interesting conversation. And I like to do things in a very layman's like way because I don't think most people are really educated. And I think that, a lot of times we're talking above the average person and not giving them a real insight into what this really means. And so when I saw that conversation taking place between the law professor, I believe she's at Berkeley, and the senator, I just thought it was interesting because I guess the question came up about whether men can, give birth. And I just thought it was, for one of the first times as this conversation has kind of grown, I realized my lack of education in the space, because if you were to ask me, I would say men can't give birth because of how I was raised and the perspective from which I come from. Now, I would say that I'm conservative, but I have grown to take a liberal view on how anyone wants to live their life. So I don't really have the bandwidth to necessarily give that much thought into how anybody wants to identify. But I will say, as someone who is noted, by society as a minority, I just think it's interesting because I realized, and for me, it was just a moment where I said, when you're a Black person, you can be anything in this world but a white man. You don't have the ability to identify as a white man. And so I think that, in these conversations, and I just encourage people in these respective groups to always think about those things, because sometimes there's a lack of education that I think, many of us, may not have been exposed to, one, for just in terms of how we were raised in fighting for some very basic rights as human beings here, I think, in the United States. And I think that in the U.S., this is one of the few places where we have this type of freedom where these things are even considerations, because when you go abroad, they're not. That's not how the rest of the world, sees a lot of things. And so I just think that there's a social conversation that needs to be pushed and encouraged amongst people across the board about what that means. And then, too, how that applies to, to Roe versus Wade in general, and how, we just look at people across that spectrum, because, now that we do have individuals who might be identify as trans, I was of the mindset, well, if they're identifying as a trans individual and you attach that to it, then it gives that clarity. But when you kind of go to the traditional, men can give birth, it's like, it seemed to be, just an argument that I felt like there's not enough clarity for everyone else to get, or to be brought up to speed on and to participate in that conversation.
Then I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's one of those. So I do a lot of organizing outside of Atlanta, like outside the perimeter in the country, and that video exchange. I remember it's like one of those. You ever see those videos where you're like, oh, I bet liberals love this, and I bet conservatives also think that they won this, and you can completely understand why, because I think you're right. There's still a lot of conversation that has to happen. And so my partner is gender nonconforming or non-binary. And when I met them, I didn't know that. They looked to me as if they were a woman. And I fell in love with them as a person. And I don't particularly, I try and live, I think, the way that you were describing. I don't particularly care whatever anyone wants to identify as. And I want to respect everybody's autonomy, which, I do think is why that ties in so well. And I appreciate that being brought up. But, one thing that I never thought about was how there's a term that people use called gender dysphoria, which is when someone who identifies as a different gender has intense feelings of not feeling like they're in the right body, or not feeling like they have been assigned the right gender at birth, or however you say that, and it frankly had never occurred to me to think about how someone who, lives their life and doesn't feel like what they have been told being a woman is, what pregnancy would do, like the stress of that process, and just how utterly confusing it is when you get pumped full of hormones all of a sudden from this process that maybe weren't even there in those same proportions before. And it was really difficult. I learned, I think everyone probably learns a ton through becoming a parent, but that was one of those ways. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah.
I just, and having these conversations and seeing the things that have been brought to the forefront. I mean, even the 10-year-old girl who to me she's a baby, who was in Ohio and pregnant. It just brought to mind, a lot of thoughts as it relates to this discussion and how that impacts, our society, and, a lot of children having to make extremely grown decisions in this day and age. But we're also, and even as it relates to even gender, I would say I would be in disagreement in a child making that decision in my mind, because I just think that that's a lifelong decision. And as you talk, as you get into the reproductive side of that, that can further compound it. So, I identify as heterosexual, and maybe traditional, but again, I don't move with the sense of judgment because I just think it's just too much. So I think, to each his own, but as it relates to that young girl who was pregnant, I really, felt the sense of conflict as it relates to this judgment and its impact on her life, especially being in a situation where she was clearly taken advantage of and being sexually assaulted. And I think that these are the stories and the aspects of it that we all have to really take into consideration when we think about these rulings, not to mention about the impact of these rulings, in terms of other laws that are on the books that took so long for us to actually enact that could be overturned as well. And you just never thought we would see certain things actually happening. And I think that America is certainly getting an education because everybody's not as educated when it comes to the political side of how things actually work. I know many Black people thought that when Obama was elected, that change was coming. And there was no change in that capacity, not from a legislative standpoint, not to the degree that we necessarily thought. And I feel as if we're constantly getting these new aspects of education given to us in different forms. So I didn't want to take away from that, but I wanted to, just lay some things out from my perspective and thoughts with this.
Thank you. To continue on with our conversation, and I appreciate the ebb and flow, the way it's going. It's really interesting to hear the viewpoints of all. So as we know, abortion is legal in Georgia. And currently right now, can be seen as an access hub for other Southerners. Southerners from all the way from Texas and Kentucky, South Carolina are coming to Georgia for abortion care. And my question for the panel is, if abortion access was restricted in Georgia, how do you think this would affect the South and folks who are seeking an abortion in other Southern states?
I think we got to parse this on a macro and a micro way.
Sure.
And even within our state, right? So I think we would be remiss to think that if abortion is illegal, that it's going to stop. And I think that's going to be the exact problem that we're going to face going forward, which is abortions are going to happen in the South, and they're going to happen a lot more. And I think a lot about Metro Atlanta and we're kind of where we are now, with just the number of people who go in for fake doctors for different types of surgeries or different types of, non-traditional medical treatments. And I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes like the next wave in which people start to go after that, right? Back alley abortions were a thing 50 years ago. And I think that now it's going to be something that you do with the click of your phone. And it's going to be throughout the state. And I do think on the micro level, we got to start understanding that as abortions start happening more and more in the state of Georgia, especially illegal abortions and things that aren't regulated, we don't really have a plan in place to deal with people who are going to receive really bad medical care. And we also don't have a plan in place for those people who are actually going to be out continuing and doing this bad medical care, because now we thought we were solving one problem. Now we created two more. And I think that that's something we just haven't got a grasp on. And this could be overnight. And so with a state like Georgia, which I think now over the last 4 years since 2018 to the present, we've had more abortions in the state every single year on year. This year will probably be the most that we've had in the history of Georgia in terms of actual registered abortions. That's not going anywhere. And so I think we do need to think about it. If we're going to have thousands of women each year having abortions in our state, we don't have a plan of access for these women who still are going to seek this out by non-traditional means.
And an interesting, not necessarily interesting, but a point I wanted to bring up is where states where abortion is restricted or completely illegal, there has been folks who have ectopic pregnancies. There are folks who need emergency surgery, and the doctors essentially have to talk to judges to determine is this person on essentially the brink of death to continue with an abortion? And I do believe if abortion care is restricted to an extent in Georgia and other certain states, what we've been seeing in the Midwest, for example, a case like that happened in my home state of Missouri. I think that's possibly a pattern that we can see is to what extent does someone who needs an abortion, quote unquote, how badly do they need it? Are they, what medical care do they have to receive in order to be seen as a quote unquote candidate to have a termination? It's definitely very scary. It's definitely something that I've been paying attention to. And as we can see in multiple cases, abortion is healthcare. Yeah. I'm going to continue for the other voices in the room, Paul and Osei.
I certainly think it is healthcare. I think, King, to your point, the education around it, I mean, it just reminds me of any time conversations occur around sex and sexuality and people's behaviors. It just, it's a rabbit hole, so to speak, that, you go down and you have to really evaluate. I've certainly just been in favor of women having that autonomy for themselves, because I just think it makes sense. But I think that, yes, at a certain point during, what's defined as the pregnancy has to be regulated so that, because if that was the case, people would abort a child at any point. And, that's when things start to get a little crazy, in my opinion. But I think, there's going to have to be a lot more education at this point. I mean, there's no question about that.
And I think to your earlier point, Osei, about lifetime impacts, it's like when you're talking about a minor, then like, how do you, it feels like I agree with you with if it's like we have to, at some point, people are going to want to agree on some kind of standard. But, at the same time, it's like with the medical emergency and the sliding scale of how bad is bad enough that a doctor's, whatever, the Hippocratic Oath, whatever kicks in, like if it's going to impact them the rest of their life, then it kind of feels like that's pretty early on, like, and yeah, the other thing I guess that I feel like you can't have a conversation about this in the South without mentioning is like Georgia's number 2 for maternal mortality. And it is principally because we don't provide healthcare to Black communities. And everybody knows it. And, so like, I guess if we want to go from number 2 to number 1, then they could ban these services. But, to King's earlier point, it feels like that's just throwing gas on a flame.
It's just like we jumped into a plane without like realizing there's no, parachutes. And it kind of felt like it was a rushed decision. And that's just me, because as somebody who's been watching this from the sidelines for a minute now, and then also just like on a more macro level, we were talking about like, we weren't talking here, but before we got on, just like how COVID has kind of changed everything from everyone, and how in real time people have gotten okay with certain people dying. And I think that that's going to be a part of our abortion decision now. We're going to have to start having people who are going to be comfortable with a certain number of women dying, from not just from ectopic pregnancies or women who are having complications, or just like the process to even judge that. And it goes from like, what are we doing? If it was really about saving lives and protecting children, why didn't we have anything in place to make this happen? It was just like, all right, abortions are banned, but then like you said, ectopic pregnancies, or women who are, if she's going to miscarry, if the baby's not going to make it and the baby's stillborn, like all these things are factored in. And Georgia literally has nothing on the books right now, which was like, it was baffling in a way that I was kind of surprised by, for the state leadership to have like nothing on the, like nothing in this point in time. We're in about to be August, and like there's still nothing on the books yet.
Yeah, the only thing they did was Governor Kemp extended Medicaid coverage to 12 months postpartum, which I'll be honest, really saved, our asses financially at the time. But, it does, I guess it does kind of feel like they took the parachutes and jumped. more than, I think to your point, it does feel like maybe nothing has changed in terms of people's comfort with other people having to take the fallout of their actions in politics.
Yeah.
I think some people are more concerned with making a political statement than clearly doing things that are in the best interest of people.
I mean, that's the world we live in. I think at this point now, it's just like who can go viral, who can be on the local news, who can get on Fox News for, the 15-second soundbite. It's less about policy, to Osei's point, more just about popularity. And I think that is just a game we can't afford to trade, like not now. People's lives are going to be at stake, and we're trying to get brownie points from our political factions because that's what we want to have right now. It's just like, what are we doing here, y'all? Like, what are we doing?
And if nothing more, you're going to definitely get an education on how legislation actually is enacted, because I really don't think the average person is just not that educated about how policy kicks in, and how it comes into play. People are spectators and they're telling you that the game is over here, so you look over there, or the game is to the right, you look over there to the right. We don't really know. And, before you know it, you're, living, you're just living under a set of laws that you in hindsight are reflecting on like, but I didn't agree to that. But, you're not necessarily, like I said, as educated, and particularly in the Black community. I think that we've gotten a really intense education post-Obama in terms of how things really work, how things are legislated, and how they impact us. And healthcare and the health disparity in our community is extreme. And I think that's something that we have to really take note of because we are consistently getting inadequate care across the board. And, we suffer. I think, the point about infant mortality and things of that nature, there's just a lack of, resources and education in our community. And I don't know what the necessarily the answer is, but we need to make sure we sound that drum.
Thank you all. Moving right along with that conversation, in you all's opinions, what can we do to support those who are accessing abortion care in Georgia?
I mean, I don't want to steal Osei's line here, but I think I look to people like yourself to tell us. I think that I was talking to my team before we came on here because we were all kind of caught in the same place at NGP of like, we know there needs to be conversation around men, having conversations with men about this. But also like, what's the number one thing that, I think as any person who doesn't feel like they had the life education or whatever kind of education on a subject, you want to look to the people that, that do this work. So like, the stuff that I've, memorized or like written down on my hand to try and get better at is like, who are the providers? Asking people, do not donate to politicians on this subject. If they're running an ad on this, please give that money to providers. They do not need it. And frankly, our leading politicians and candidates in Georgia have enough money. They're going to be fine, but the people that need it, I think, are the people that do the work like you do. I don't know how we would have gotten through our pregnancy, childbirth journey without a doula. And, when you go into there was only one other Black woman in the hospital wing the entire time we were there, and it was someone we had met at the cookout that like told us they would pop in to make sure that we were okay. But otherwise, it's really nice to have someone there that helps like just stick up and make sure that the care is culturally competent. But I mean, I feel like that's my starting point. I don't know where to go from there.
Sure, I'll tag team. So one really important thing is to donate to local abortion funds. So there is a website, N as in no, N as in no, A as in apple, F, National Network, F as in, what did I say? F as in fun, double NAF. NNFA.org, the National Network of Abortion Funds, and you can type in your local zip code, and they will direct you to the abortion fund in your state. So whether that is locally here, that would be ARC Southeast in Georgia, or even the Yellowhammer Fund in Alabama, you can do your part by supporting your local abortion funds. And similar to what you said, Paul, is, ensuring folks know that abortion is definitely legal in Georgia, and letting them know the places in Atlanta and in Georgia where you can still receive culturally competent care. And so they're whether you want to do a Google search or Abortion Care Network can also give you those sites of where you wanted to choose the center where you receive care. Those are things that you can do well to support folks who are accessing abortion care in Georgia.
I do want to ask the fellows a question. I know we're talking about abortion, so I know there's no better way to say it. We have a certain role in this that, you don't play, right? Like, you can't, I'm still like Osei, I'm still learning about who can get pregnant, what, but to my knowledge, like, we're the ones who actually get, the women pregnant. Like, how did that, what was going through y'all minds when y'all were thinking about this, when the announcements were coming down? Because it kind of trickled slow and then kind of happened all at once.
I mean, I saw an article talking about vasectomies are going up. And I'm just thinking to myself, what happened to a good old fashioned condom?
Okay. I'm with you on that one.
I just don't like a vasectomy. I just don't see myself going to get a vasectomy.
Yeah, that seems like a permanent kind of.
It seems pretty extreme. Yeah. And, I think on top of the fact that we're talking about pregnancy on one end, but I think sexual health is the other question. And it's like, okay, I get that, but, come on now. I think, and again, I think we've gotten very comfortable with access to things like Plan B and all these things. I mean, I can remember when that was becoming a conversation, right? And, you just are going to have to be a lot more intentional and responsible, in my opinion. I mean, I think, men, the best thing that you can do is be sensitive to your partner and what their decision is in that regard, because it's not just that easy. But I also think that you can't just be that irresponsible coming out of a phase like the pandemic where you're just like, okay, you know what I mean? But we know that things do happen. And, I feel like we just have to be very conscious, and, you are potentially making a lifelong decision with that individual. That's my take.
I will say that I did this before. This wasn't the decision came down and then I went and did this. I did get a vasectomy.
No way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I don't think I have a lot of respect for why a black man might not want to even go near that conversation. I think this country's done a lot of stuff that informs that kind of, informs that idea and not wanting to do that. So I totally, that's not a judgment place at all. But, I'll say we didn't want more than one kid. We had one kid. My partner had already received abortion care. And we didn't want to go. That's a lifelong commitment. Like at the point that they decided that they wanted to keep it, mm-hmm. I said that's the rest of my life, and I don't need to be screwing around with this. And selfishly, I think as men, we have probably at some point in our life complained about condoms, despite how easy and no nonsense, common sense, and responsibility people should have around it. Yeah, but no, I did, and the funny part is I learned more about the hurdles and the bureaucracy and the hoops you got to jump through if you were pregnant and wanted to get abortion care through that process than I did before, because not just like I'm sure it's miles easier, but similar to a lot of the things that conservative state legislatures do with women, when you go to get a vasectomy, you got to have your partner with you. They got to sign off. They got to sit to the training with you. We had our 3-month kid sitting here in this doctor's office with, 4 other couples trying to figure this out or whatever. And I was like, oh, so I couldn't, you as a man, every man in this room does not have the autonomy to go say, I don't want to have more kids, because, as I'm an anti-capitalist as well. And we live in a society that looks at us as money-making property. And to the degree that it is, it's proper to think about, it's hard for me to imagine that a lot of this abortion bans, a lot of these kind of controlling of people's bodies is not due to the fact that people want a workforce for their company in the next 10 years and they want it in 20 years and 30. And so I just, same thing like I think everybody that's sane should have with the state. I got a lot of skepticism over large corporations and the way their labor forces, how they go about getting those as well. And I feel like that informs a lot of this. So I just said, I want out.
Well, let me be clear too. I mean, I'm not referencing anyone who's in a relationship and decides to make that kind of decision. Yeah. I'm just thinking about randomly men saying, okay, I just want to.
That is strange to me.
Vasectomy because I don't. And let me take it a bit further. And to your point, Paul, I mean, you're right about the history in this country. And I would say that Black people have every reason to be very skeptical of a lot of things when it comes to the medical establishment. And, my father's a physician, but that doesn't change that it is what it is as a whole. He's dedicated his life to serving the Black community on purpose. But I would have to say that I've seen some things that make me, have some very questionable thoughts about people and their intentions in that space. And, just an understanding what the one politician said about saving the white race. And I don't think we can skim over that. You know what I mean? Like there's a much bigger political agenda that people need to be informed on. And I think that, again, the conversation can sometimes fly over a lot of people's heads. They're not getting educated on this every step of the way. And I think that it requires that, we find ways to have this dialogue in our community that people are really, just being informed, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask something slightly immature, and I apologize for this.
You've been waiting. Go for it.
Okay. And I'm going to be clear about this. In my life, I've never met a man who willingly said they got a vasectomy. So I if you don't mind, can I ask a few questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Did it hurt?
No, you don't have to get Novocaine, but they can give you
lidocaine.
Lidocaine, thank you. Yeah, Novocaine's the dentist stuff that makes the kids make funny YouTube videos.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can actually get what the guy told me. Guy in Athens said he put himself through medical school giving vasectomies in the 70s, and no one wants to do it, so he just did it, and he fell into a career. This dude, it's an assembly line. And I mean, it's his main practice. He's he does prostate cancer and all that stuff. Urologist. There we go. That's the word. Mm-hmm. And he said a lot of people actually prefer to be put under just because it is
Wait, so you were awake the whole time when it happened?
Oh yeah. No, I didn't want to get put under for a 10-minute procedure. And I didn't know if my insurance was going to cover it. I was like, can you do local anesthetic or whatever?
You're a warrior.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I'm not going to lie. It was weird. It's a weird thing, but I think about the fact that for a long time the only way that women that have very intense menstrual cycles could get relief was with birth control. And I think about how am I going to be weird about this when every other group of people outside of my specific group, white men, have had to either accept things in a birth control sense, in a medical sense, that weren't that weren't good. In retrospect, is not preferable. I mean, I think from the beginning, it's we talk about we'd rather people shoot blanks than I forget what the other part of it is. But like male birth control, like they're working on like pill forms and things like that, and like reversible things, whatever. But like I can't afford another kid. That's not going to happen. If I get another kid and prices rising like they're rising right now and all that, like, nah, no way. And like, also, my partner is just a badass, and I'm trying to keep up and keep them interested in me. So like, I'm falling behind, and then I feel like I'm not living up to my, my obligations as a partner, as a husband. Like, it's just a whole mess I don't want anything to deal with.
Okay, because no offense, it just seemed like from the idea seemed very painful just off the top. So just hearing somebody talk about it is
oh no, it's literally like 3 millimeters. Like we're talking like a tiny thing.
Okay, no, I'm not doing this for me, but I just wanted to know. Like,
are you sure? No, I'm just making sure, man.
No,
if you're interested, then
I'm trying to get a few more. Well, not that I'm trying to get there. My goal is to get 4, so I want to get 4. So I'm at 0, but I'm trying to get 4 before 40. So I got a couple years, but I got to make this happen.
4 kids before 40?
Well, really, now, when I was younger, I said it, but now like 4 before 50. So we'll see. I got time.
Good luck.
It's not that hard, but like, no, I'm not going to Nick Cannon it, but like try to do it like the right way. So that's what I mean. I'm sorry. Yeah. I know we took a small.
No, I think this is really, really important. Actually, for folks who are listening, who may not know, also for abortion, you have the option of also being awake for an abortion as well. Local anesthetic, so using lidocaine to numb the cervix. And you also have the option of the medical abortion pill or going under anesthesia for your abortion as well. So I think it's really important that we wake this conversation up because some folks don't know the background of how these procedures work. And I think it's really important to be up and open and upfront about those. So one of my jobs as a doula is to hold folks' hands during their local procedures. So I'm holding their hand while they're receiving their abortion. So I think that's really great. And I'm really, really happy that we're having this conversation about how vasectomies work because we need to normalize the conversation.
Right. To Osei's point, the average person didn't know. And listen, I'm a pretty learned dude, and I had never talked to anyone who's ever had a vasectomy ever. Right. I know some people who probably should have. Right. But like never met any. Like, so this is interesting to me. Like, this is a whole new thing.
And it's hard to, I agree. I 100% agree. I saw this thread on Twitter that was like someone that studies history of reproductive justice, and they were talking about, there was the immediate reaction of like, oh, well, men should just all go get vasectomies, and like trying to explain some of the history of this country's medical practices. Thinking specifically like Tuskegee Institute, obviously thinking about. If you've never read up about it, read about the things that the United States has done to the Puerto Rican people with medical practices. I think we got to this funny place where it's just very similar. They only want us having kids. They only want us having more kids, and that's true because insurance won't cover a vasectomy. Even though you would think that would make you a safer bet in the long term. So like, I'm still trying to pay that thing off. It was like $1,000 by the end of it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but if you want to end the discussion of vasectomy, it's $1,000. It took him 10 minutes. Oh. And frankly, didn't even they talk about like, oh, it might hurt a little bit afterwards, and even that was like, I know it's probably different like by person, but it was, I don't know, it was fine. You just sit on the couch for a day.
I learned something today.
Not what you thought we were going to be talking about when we came in here?
Not at all, actually. Like, this was not any of those things.
A real education.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Right. That is... I think about that, though, to what you're saying, too, right? Because I think about somebody like 19-year-old me, right? Like, 19-year-old me, 18, 19-year-old me. I'm on college for the first time, just with this whole abortion, like, what my life would be like if, I obviously did not have an abortion, but like what it's like to have a college girlfriend who's even considering like, oh, her period's late and like what that means and things, and all the future young people like me who are just now going to be in a weird position on how do you, and this is something I'm going to ask for you and also for the fellas, for you first, which is like, how do you talk to like young men who would have been like the 19-year-old version of me, like who doesn't really know what to do now, right? Like their girlfriend missed a period. They're not even at the point of even considering abortion, but they're just like, what do I do? Because, she's the one who has to carry it, but, I'm here too. And like, we're both kind of confused on what's going on. Like, how do you address that with people?
Sure. I think first and foremost, it's important that you have a conversation of safety and support, understanding that as partners, you're going to do everything to uplift and elevate each other in terms of needs, especially in this case, the girlfriend's needs. And I guess if we're transitioning to the conversation of what is next, pregnancy test to confirm the pregnancy. And if it was a positive pregnancy, I think it is up to, let's say her name is Sheila and Steve, right? I think it would be up to Sheila to determine whether or not she would be interested in delivering the child and becoming a mother. And I think that conversation is a lot, but it consists of, what are your dreams and goals right now? Is motherhood in your future? Is caregiving is a lifetime commitment? Is this person willing to make that lifetime commitment? And if so, that's great. Young mothers have existed for centuries, and it is wonderful when people want to cross that bridge into becoming parents. If they don't see that in their future, that's great too. We can have that conversation about termination, what it takes to get to the clinic, funding, all of that, and having that partner, Steve, being there for her the entire way. Because with this conversation, though it may be hard, there are options. And I think just educating people about their options, I think is just the best way to go. There's no shame. There's no guilt. It's just, it's this having that support is most important.
All right. And then for y'all, like, what would, like, obviously this is a different time, but like, what would y'all 18, 19, 20-year-old self be if you guys are in that position now? Like, you're in 2022 and like.
When was your first pregnancy scare?
When I was 19, I was about to say my college's name. I'm not going to say that, but 18, 19. Oh, 19 for sure. I remember that.
I think mine was 18 as a senior in high school. And I don't know that I even had the capacity to understand what was happening. I just remember going and like sitting in the auditorium because no one was in there and just waiting to hear what the test results would be. I think there's two things. One, I think it's only one person in this scenario is risking their life. And like, that's just a fact. Cause that gets closer to like what's the father's rights in these kind of cases. And I do think that it's a complicated conversation, or I think there's things that you would hope to be true, for every potential dad. I think with my partner, it was very much more of it's, I'm going to support whatever decision you want to make here. If at some point you feel like you're in a place and we could talk about, what I would necessarily like in the scenario, then great. If not, I'm here. But I think it's also sometimes we got to acknowledge that situations are sometimes just that big, right? Like it's okay if I think about if my partner had decided not to have our son, and that would have hurt. And there's no way around that. But I also think that, like, yeah, it's a big thing. It hurts. That doesn't mean that the decision was wrong. It just hurts. It's a big thing. I don't know. What do you think, Osei?
I think at 19, 20, sometimes I wish I already did. Just because I understand, but I also understand that, life and trajectory works a certain way, and the direction that your life is being guided. There's a number of variables. In 2022, I can only imagine, and I just feel like there's a lot of interesting decisions being made by a lot of young people that it just causes me to have questions and wonder, how are we guiding them and what the responsibility is of us being older and what we're imparting on them, because at some point they are going to be stewards of our society. And so what perspective are we leaving them with, or are we, helping to reinforce? So I don't know. I'm a little torn on that. And I've been thinking about it a lot more as of late. Even if you isolate yourself, you're not isolated, because whatever's happening in the mass population will have a trickle down effect on how you live your life at some point. And I think we just need to know that we're really all connected. So I think there's a lot for us to think about. And there's a lot of conversation that we need to start having with young people and encouraging them to have, so that we can be better as a society.
Thank you. I wanted to give room for any final thoughts or comments or epiphanies for our conversation today. This was very enlightening, and I learned a lot today. Any final thoughts before we close?
I appreciate y'all for having me. This is definitely enlightening in a lot of ways. The only thing I will say is I'm always a person like, let's just think before we do something. I just really hope at the end of this conversation, we all kind of think before we do anything. And hopefully, like, the information that people pick up today is beneficial in some regard, maybe not now, but in the future.
Excellent. Once again, everyone, thank you. Thank you all so much for contributing so much to this conversation. Again, this conversation was brought to you by the Canopy Atlanta, journalism for community by community in the metropolitan Atlanta area. My name is Nzingha. Thank you so much for joining us. And may we continue to live in a world where reproductive justice and bodily autonomy is for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining our Courageous Conversation with Canopy Atlanta. Our guests included Osei Kweku, King Williams, and Paul Glaze. Guest host, Nzingha Hall. Courageous Conversation with Canopy Atlanta is exclusively produced by Canopy Atlanta. Created and produced by Ann Hill Bonds. Guest producers, Malika Hakeem and Gina Billingsley. Production by The Plug ATL. Courageous Conversation with Canopy Atlanta can be found on canopyatlanta.org, as well as on all social media platforms. Until next time, Canopy Atlanta encourages you to continue to have your courageous conversation in your community.